Make sure it's on here. Yep, we're live. Hello. Sorry about being a bit late, but yeah, we'll get straight to it then. All right.
I ain't got no home, I'm just a roaming round. Just a wandering worker, I go from town to town. And the police make it hard wherever I may go. And I ain't got no home in this world anymore. My brothers and my sisters are stranded on this road, a hot and dusty road that 1,000,000 feet have trod. Rich man took my home and drove me from my door, and I ain't got no home in this world anymore. Was a farming on the shares, and always I was poor. My crops I lay into the banker's store. My wife took down and died up on the cabin floor, and I ain't got no home in this world anymore. Now as I look around, it's mighty plain to see this world is such a great and a funny place to be. All the gambling man is rich and the working man is poor, and I ain't got no home in this world anymore.
Guys, I'm here right now with farmer Anthony Lee. We are on the highway. As you can see, we're not alone. Anthony, can you tell us what's going on?
Well, you can see we're having a barbecue at the moment. In the winter in
Yeah,
Germany.
you came prepared.
We are always prepared, yeah. And this is the most frequent highway in Germany.
The most used
The
highway
most
in
used
Germany?
actually in Europe, to be honest.
Oh, wow.
A2. So it's not normal to stand here, but no, we are sick of lies. We are sick of trying to get rid of our jobs. It's not only farmers, it's the lorry drivers, it's the normal workers. Everybody is sick of politicians who have no idea what they're talking about, who have no education to tell us how our lifestyle should look like. And this is the result of 4 years trying to get in contact with politicians, talking to them on an equal level, but they won't listen. And now we have no other choice than to demonstrate, and it's our right.
Yes.
It's one of the highest rights, especially in Germany.
Yeah.
To demonstrate. We are not violent. This is all friendly. You can see we have a small gap, and people can drive through. Police, ambulances, everybody can come through. But this is only the tip of the iceberg, to be honest, because all over Germany we have. This is the west. We have Dutch farmers coming over to support us.
At
In
the
the
border.
east, we have Hungarian farmers, Polish farmers, and we are all united in getting rid of politicians who are trying to get rid of us.
Right. Yeah, so I was very active in the Dutch farmers protest, and I remember I said a few years ago, guys, pay attention because this is going to be a global issue. There's a global attack on farming. You are describing the same thing here in Germany. Why are these politicians coming after you? Why are they trying to destroy you?
I think there are many reasons. First of all, they want our land, and yeah, you in Holland are kind of the example what politics want or
Right.
politicians want. They want our land to build industry, houses. I don't know for refugees, whoever. I don't care for what.
Right.
But the reason they want it is not really my thing to say, but we are the people who don't, we don't work in a co-working space, and we don't have a startup or what. We produce the most
Food.
important thing in the world, food.
Right.
We are here since generations, and they're trying to get rid of us, and we can't let that be. We have all kids. I have 3 kids. I want them to do my job for the next generations.
Yeah.
We have people here who are the 14th, 15th generation farming.
Right.
We are the guys who get up, work 24/7 at all weather conditions, and we are the guys who prepare you with the healthiest food, and we do everything that people want us to do.
Yes.
Germany, everyone says we have to get rid of CO2. Okay, the only guys who can get rid of CO2, if you think it will kill us, right, are
Right.
the farmers and the people who own forests.
For us, it was nitrogen, but we all know that it's a lie. It's a pretext. It's a pretext.
Ridiculous.
And
Yeah.
I feel like the general population knows. They support you. I mean, I was emotional watching the truckers, watching the tractors, everybody just come on the road here. I mean, this is of historical magnitude. I keep on repeating myself, but I'm serious. I think this is of historical magnitude. And the people of Germany, of the Netherlands, I think of all of Europe, America is watching. We are all with you. God bless you. And we're here to support you.
Thank
And
you very much.
thank you so much for talking to me.
You're welcome. Go and talk to the normal people who
Of
are in
course.
the traffic jam.
I will. Let's go.
Everybody supports us.
Oh, I spoke to a few people who were stuck and said, "Oh, I'm missing. If I meet 20 meetings, I don't care."
Yeah,
They
exactly.
know why they're here.
Yeah.
They know that you guys
They're
provide them
sick
with
of
food.
politicians who lie, who are not willing to do that what they should do
Right.
to get us a better future.
Yes.
Yeah, they don't do that.
Thank you so much.
You're
God
welcome.
bless.
Thank you.
Dutch farmers are protesting the government's target of reducing nitrogen pollution by 50% by 2030. To reach that target, the Dutch government is imposing restrictions that will force over 11,000 farms to close, and over 17,000 farms will have to reduce their livestock significantly. Hence, the Dutch farmers' livelihood is clearly under threat, and so is our access to reliable and affordable food that we in the West have been enjoying for decades. In response to the government's restrictions, the Dutch farmers have taken to the streets to protest. With their tractors, they have blocked highways and supermarket distribution centres. They have lit hay bales on fire, and they have sprayed manure on government buildings. But one thing they haven't done, they haven't given up. They have kept on going strong, despite failed negotiations with the government who haven't budged an inch on their plans, and despite the way the Dutch police have been dealing with the protesters. Speaking of the Dutch police, it's safe to say they have been sympathetic and supportive of other groups in the past. The most recent example of this has to be the Canal Parade that is held every year in Amsterdam. And this year, the theme of the parade was My Gender, My Pride. For this parade, the police had their own boat. And the chief of the Dutch National Police, Henk van Essen, left the following comment on Twitter. Today, the police are sailing along for Canal Pride because we believe that you should be able to be yourself, inside and outside the police, regardless of your identity or sexual orientation. We are a police force of and for everyone, but it seems that of and for everyone does not include the Dutch farmers. The police have resorted to attaching tracking devices to the ankles of protesters that they've arrested. They've brutalized protesters with their batons. And they even fired shots at a farmer in his tractor, who happened to be only 16 years old.
Wat het gat?
Ja?
Ja, dat zit hier. Kun je vinger haast wel indrukken. Het is een flink gat.
Dat was niks
Onbegrijpelijk, ja. Nou ja, hier daarnaast, door het raam heen. Hoofdhoogte, ja. Schiet de banden. Zo'n groot doel. Sta je binnen een paar meter stuk stil.
The police said that they had to fire shots because the farmer was driving their tractor into the offices and their vehicles. But that's not what I see happening here.
Hey, rij weg, jongen, rij weg. Waarom is dat?
In any case, the same hands the police are using to brutalize farmers are the same hands they use to pour a splash of milk into their coffees every morning, to make a sandwich for their kids, to chop their vegetables for their salads. All nutritious foods they can access thanks to the hard work of the men they are now brutalizing. How can they do that and sleep at night? They need to show some respect and some gratitude, because these farmers are the finest farmers in the world. They have gotten up at the crack of dawn, 7 days a week, and with their blood, sweat and tears have made the tiny country the Netherlands is the second biggest exporter of agricultural goods in the world. Not only have they been feeding Dutch families for centuries, families of many other countries in the world have been enjoying their goods. I, for one, am a big fan of their cheese, and we will all miss the farmers when our stomachs growl of hunger if the Dutch government continues with this insanity, because no farmers, no food.
Farmers say they're fed up at not being listened to by the government. They want more of a say in the freshwater regulations, and they don't want a tax on their utes, the ute tax. Ridiculous. Today, they'll roll through the streets up and down the country on their tractors and with their horses and their dogs and even the crop planes. This is a mass protest. And joining us now is the man behind the groundswell protest. What a good guy, and well done to him, Bryce McKenzie. Welcome to the program. Good to have you on, Bryce. Good morning.
Yeah, good morning, Duncan. It's a cold one down here in Gore.
I bet you it is. No surprise to people in Gore on that one. Hey, tell us, how did this all start? And welcome to the show, by the way, Bryce. How did this all start?
Just started with people being a little bit concerned about the NPS on fresh water when it first came out. So we did a bit of a tractor protest in Gore, a cobber of mine, and well, he's a cobber now. He wasn't at the time, and we ended up driving to Gore. Just the two of us basically, and there was over 100 tractors there. So that's how Groundswell got started.
Yeah, I think Groundswell will swell today too. What sort of numbers are you predicting? You've had so much feedback has come in, it sort of exploded on social media, didn't it? What sort of numbers do you think? Just have a sort of a wild guess today. What do you reckon?
Yeah, look, we're expecting thousands. Just how many thousands, we don't know. The feedback from everywhere around New Zealand has been that they are just blown away by the number of contacts that have been in contact with them.
Yeah. What's the guts of the protest? Why are you protesting? What have you had enough of? Give me a couple of examples of, the sort of stuff that you're angry about.
Okay, well, we've had enough of just constant barrage of regulations, and these regulations aren't fit for purpose. It started with the freshwater NPS, and I'm a conservationist myself, as I'm a founding member of a water care group, and we founded that back in 2014, and it's been one of the most successful stories there is in cleaning up waterways, and it's an award-winning group. It's called the Pomahaka Water Care Group, and it's turned a river around completely. So that's basically, we know what it takes to get clean water, and you don't get it through regulations, and you don't get it through unworkable regulations.
Yeah, and you also don't get much credit for it, do you? Because all the farmers get sort of tarred with the same brush. Oh, you don't care about the environment. Of course, you bloody care about the environment, because you want to pass your farm on to those behind you and or under you. And this is a lifelong thing. This is something that doesn't end. Why would you want to ruin the environment?
Yeah, exactly right. I mean, some of us are third generation farmers and up to fifth generation farmers. If we were ruining the land that we're on, we surely wouldn't be able to farm it still. So it's in our interest to actually look after that farmland for the next generation. And I might add that, you know, our spokesman on Indigenous biodiversity is actually a native nurseryman, and he's restoring native areas all around New Zealand. So it's not as if the two people that are speaking out on their particular areas of water and Indigenous biodiversity haven't got hands-on experience of what's going on.
Yeah, well, just Ardua said on election night, I remember it clearly, saying that she was going to govern for all of New Zealand. So she said she'll govern for all of you.
Yeah, well, we would hope so. I mean, she shows a lot of care and compassion in some areas. We would like a little bit shown to the farming and rural community for what they're going through, because we don't see much of it.
Right, you'd like her to drop some of the regulation. You'd like her to. Well, what about the ute tax? This tax on petrol utes.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's just the straw that's broken the camel's back, really. We don't have any option, and it does the heavy lifting on the farms and for tradespeople. So for us, it's just a real kick in the guts just when we're down anyway. And that's really what's finished people off. They just had enough.
Sometimes, Bryce, you got to be careful what you wish for. And I think back to that last election, and there was an amazing groundswell towards Labor. Why?
Yeah, look, some people say that the rural sector wanted to keep the Greens out. Look, I don't really know. I try not to think about politics too much at all and concentrate on where I'm best suited.
Bryce, I wish you a lot of luck for your protest today. I know the farmers are having a tough time, but there are critics who have come out and have said, hey, you know, what about the government is backing farmers when it comes to droughts or floods or anything like that? What do you say to that when the government also supports you in other areas, you know, take from one hand and then sort of protest on the other?
Yeah, okay, and I mean, when you get, I think it was 500,000 given to North Canterbury when they got all the floods, and you just compare that with what's been given to the gangs for drug rehabilitation. I mean, 500,000, considering the area that's been damaged, seems pretty pittance to me. It doesn't seem equitable as far as I'm concerned.
Okay, well, all the best for today, Bryce. We appreciate your time this morning. What's a good outcome? What's one thing that you'd like to see as an outcome after today?
A good outcome for us is just having a voice for the farmers and tradespeople. That's number one, and they haven't had one for a long, long time. That includes the growers, of course. So we're really pleased that they get a chance to show how they feel. The other thing is, if it was a really good outcome, I guess we would feel that we've been listened to and what we've been saying is taken on board and something's done about it.
Sean, can I ask you a question, please?
Yeah.
Sean, can you tell me, as an MEP, what yourself, Maria Walsh, and the rest of the Fine Gael MEPs signed us up to this nature restoration law? Okay, the government has said that they want to reduce emissions by 25% before 2030. That's less than 6 years ago. They want to reduce emissions by 50% by 2050. Okay, what that's going to do is that's going to shrink Irish farmer families to a point where they will no longer be viable. Okay, and at the moment, the latest figures I have are from the Stockholm Environmental Institute.
Yeah.
948,000 hectares, 1/7 of the surface area of this country has been deforested in Brazil. Okay? And that's from 2020. So it's safe to assume now that we're over 1 million hectares deforested in Brazil. Okay? A country which is 6,163 nautical miles from Ireland. And you're going to shut these guys down by the way Fine Gael and this government are voting in Europe. They're going to shut these guys down. Hang on, let me finish. They're going to shut these guys down, and we're going to be in a position then where we're importing beef from Brazil. And it's supposed to be to save the climate.
Dutch farmers are out protesting on the street because our government has pushed a law, a nitrogen law, that is basically going to put a lot of these farmers out of business. They have to cut their livestock by 30% before the end of 2030. And well, like I said, then that land goes to the state. So the state is stealing our farmers' land, and the farmers are obviously not having it. I mean, if the state would come into my house and would say, I'm going to take 30% of everything that you have ever worked for, I wouldn't be happy either. But as you saw, the state doesn't respond very well to these farmers protesting, and even have used violence and even shot at a 16-year-old boy that you saw driving away from the protest. So things are getting pretty ugly over here.
Why are they responding in this way, and why are they picking this fight now at a time when there are huge disruptions in the food supply chain around the world?
Because it's not really about a nitrogen crisis for our government. We even had a report come out, a state report, stating that the new regulations are way too harsh on the farmer, even for the nitrogen goal, quote unquote, that they're trying to reach. So there has to be an ulterior motive. And they're not so secretive, actually, about what their ulterior motive is. We've seen in other state documentation that they need the land for housing. And for who do they need these housings? Well, for new immigrants coming to the country. So that's one. And then another theory that obviously we have is that this is a global agenda. It's the 2030 agenda. It's the Great Reset. And farmers are, of course, a really independent group that stand in the way of that. So it's this globalist institutions that are controlling our everyday lives, and in this form, it's really taking away property. So
Dutch farmers are some of the most productive in the world. How can it make sense, even to totally incompetent governments, to take farmland and, as you say, use it to build housing for all the unskilled immigrants that Western nations are importing on an industrial scale?
Well, because they have different plans for us. Let me just tell you, your favorite man in the world, Bill Gates, of course, is related to this story once again. So the Dutch minister who pushed for this nitrogen law, she has a brother-in-law who owns a online picnic. It's called Picnic Supermarket. And the supermarket has had a $600 million investment last year by no other than Bill Gates. Once again, and that's the man, obviously, who wants us all to eat his Beyond Burger, his fake synthetic meat, and the bugs, of course. So that's the type of future that these people have in mind for us, and it's a good way to keep us under their control. If they control the food supply, you control the people.
You know, I wouldn't mind eating insects picked out for me by Bill Gates, were it not for the fact that you never know how manipulated those insects might be and what miracle vaccines he might have managed to put in all those attractive little bugs. Thank you for that, Ava. I don't understand how Bill Gates, he built Windows 98, the bane of everybody's existence, and it made him so much money that he has now become the biggest farmer on the planet, and he is breeding this. No one would try, if you submitted this to your publisher as a science fiction novel, Bill Gates, a very wealthy man who made a lousy computer, and he used all the money to become a big farmer of special insects that you're going to eat instead of beef and lamb and chicken and veal and kedgeree. No publisher would buy that.
Hello, good afternoon. And today, one of the biggest protests that has ever taken place in Europe is happening as German farmers are going to Berlin and major cities and on many of the motorways and highways in Germany with tractors joined by truckers to protest at the idiocy of the government, who is making a war on farmers and farming in Germany. But this is part of the global battle of globalists against ordinary working people, particularly farmers in Germany, and we've seen this in the Netherlands as well, as they impose ever more ridiculous measures to do with combating climate change, but what they're doing is affecting farmers, not realizing, or perhaps they are realizing, that if they attack farmers with new taxes, and which is what they're doing in Germany, they're going to put a tax, they're proposing a tax on farmers' diesel. They get special diesel, as you probably know. Agricultural diesel for agricultural use is colored red, and it's tax-free in most of the world. But what they want to do in Germany is put a tax on that, tax it like the normal fuel that you would use and get in petrol stations. And so the price of diesel for farmers' tractors and vehicles is going to go through the roof, which means that small farms in particular are not going to be able to survive, because they will have their outlay, their costs will just increase. They will go up exponentially with this new tax on diesel for farms and farmers, and tax on agricultural vehicles that they want to do. And that's going to make lots of farms just go bust, go bankrupt. It's absolutely insane. But in Germany at the moment, you have what they call the Traffic Light Coalition. It's a red, yellow, green coalition. So leftist, socialists, liberals, and green parties are in a coalition together. So you can imagine what a disaster that is. And the farmers are out protesting, and it is a wonderful sight to behold. They're just hundreds of thousands of ordinary, normal people, working people, who just want to get on, bring up their families and go about their businesses and grow food for us to eat. It's insane that a government, which is obviously linked in with all the globalist organizations, you know, the World Economic Forum, etc., the UN and all their climate stuff, the Paris Climate Agreement and everything that's going on with that, and they're attacking farmers, and what they're doing is going to make it harder and harder to grow and produce food, which means that people aren't going to have enough to eat. Well, I'm sure they will have enough to eat if the system goes on and they don't get overthrown by somebody. I'm not advocating for a violent revolution, by the way, in saying that. But you know, these people, they get on their private jets, they go to all these luxury summits around the world, and they eat the finest meat and the loveliest vegetables. But then they say that everybody else should eat less meat and has to survive on a diet of bugs and franken food manufactured in a 3D printing meat factories and so on. You know, the stuff that is going to be absolutely hideous and carcinogenic. That's what they want you and me to eat, while they go swanning off around the world and they take a small amount of the best food for themselves, while running down the farming industry, so ordinary people can't produce food and they can't have enough food. They're deliberately creating scarcities on the back of this so-called climate agenda, which says that, oh, people need to cut down carbon dioxide, so we're going to tax farmers' diesel, so they can't buy enough diesel to grow anything or make any profit on what they grow, and therefore will go out of business. And yeah, some of the farmers are there and they are saying, well, that's one of the reasons. Another reason is because the government wants to take their land and build on it, build huge new housing estates for asylum seekers who are pouring into Europe. And Germany has been particularly hit by very, very high rates of mass rapid immigration since 2015, when Angela Merkel was the Chancellor of Germany and opened the doors for millions and millions of refugees to come, or so-called refugees, many of them are bogus asylum seekers, to come to Germany, because most of them are military-aged men, and they receive free flats and housing. And so that's the game. It's all linked together. But it's fantastic to see so many hundreds of thousands of people getting together and fighting back and protesting. And the government of Germany must listen, or it must go. It's very simple. Same thing has happened in the Netherlands, and the farmers there protested when the government tried to bring in restrictions on nitrogen emissions, which is crazy because, you know, farming uses nitrogen because nitrogen is in the fertilizer. That's what fertilizer does. Fertilizer contains nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, the elements that plants need to grow more quickly and provide higher yields of food and produce. And they wanted to close down farms that use nitrogen, that produced nitrogen gases, and basically take their highly desirable land, which they could have just flipped into residential developments and made a quick, massive profit on it from their property developer mates, no doubt. That's what that was about in Netherlands. But farmers fought back there. There's been an election in both the upper and the lower house of parliament in the Netherlands, and they've got in a government that now supports the farmers. So in Germany, they need to get rid of that government, that insane climate alarmist government, which is attacking farmers and instigating a war on food. And this is happening all around the world in other countries as well. I mean, Ireland, the insane government in Ireland says that they're going to cull 200,000 cattle. They're just going to kill half the cows in Ireland because apparently cows produce methane when they flatulate. Yes, they do, because they're cows. That's what cows do. But they're part of the countryside. You don't just go and kill 200,000 cows because you want to protect the planet. That's destroying the planet. So these people who are climate ideologues, they are trying to destroy the planet to, so they say, save the planet. And part of what they're doing is a war on farmers. Well, all power to the elbow of the German farmers today in their protest, and may they be successful, and may they keep growing their food and keep food coming to our plates for the near and the distant future as well. God bless you all, farmers.
Have you seen that vigilante man? Have you seen that vigilante man? Have you seen that vigilante man? I've been hearing his name all over the land. Well, what is a vigilante man? Tell me, what is a vigilante man? Has he got a gun and a club in his hand? Is that a vigilante man? Rainy night down in the engine house, sleeping just as still as a mouse. Man come along and chased us out in the rain. Was that a vigilante man? Stormy days we'd pass the time away, sleeping in some good warm place. Man come along and we give him a little race. Was that a vigilante man? Preacher Casey was just a working man. And he said, unite all you working men. Killed him in the river, some strange man was that, a vigilante man. Oh, why does a vigilante man, why does a vigilante man carry that sawed-off shotgun in his hand? Would he shoot his brother and sister down? I rambled around from town to town. I rambled around from town to town. And they herded us around like a wild herd of cattle. Was that the vigilante men? Have you seen that vigilante man? Have you seen that vigilante man? I've heard his name all over the land.
Hello everybody, Peter Sweden here, and I am in the Netherlands today because the government here is planning on seizing 3,000 farms, or forcing the farmers to sell their land to the state in order to meet new climate goals. Yes, perfect farmland like this right behind me here is going to be seized by the government, taken by the government, just like under communism. Basically it is climate communism. And they're going to build houses here instead or whatever. And the farmers are not happy about this, and they are having a protest. So I decided to come here to the Netherlands to report on it. I will be interviewing farmers, I'll be covering the protest. There's going to be a massive protest with farmers coming to The Hague, and with tractors. Unfortunately, they have said that the tractors won't be allowed to come in. The government does not like when people are going to protest. Basically, the government is planning on seizing the farms, and then when people protest against it, they are trying to stop the protest as well. It's kind of crazy. And just think about how crazy it is. The government is planning on seizing perfect farmland like this. Farmland that has been owned by farmers for generations. You have young farmers coming up. They're going to have their career as a farmer. And that will just be ripped away from them. People will lose their livelihoods, and the farmers are not happy. They've been protesting for a long time now, and they're planning a large protest here because they are standing up against this government tyranny, and the mainstream media is ignoring it. So that's why I'm here. Now, when I arrived at the protest in Netherlands, there was a lot of people there, about 10,000 people, and it was a great atmosphere. People were eating, dancing. There was lots of music. It was kind of like a big concert protest against government tyranny. And of course you hear nothing about this in the mainstream media. And the funny thing is, the mainstream media was there. I was literally standing right beside a cameraman for the AP, the Associated Press. Did they say anything about, did they show anything of this? No, you bet they didn't. They're only there to film in case something happens that they want, in case something negative happens, and then they want to get that out on video and then push it out. But because everything was completely peaceful, of course, they just completely ignored it. And there was a lot of police there. That was the interesting thing when I was in Hague that morning, because you see a lot of tractors were planning on coming to the protest. Hundreds or maybe thousands of tractors were driving in, and they were stopped by the police and the military. They actually had brought in military trucks to block out the tractors from coming in to the city. So they had to park their tractors outside the city and then come in by bus instead, or take the bikes in. So they did make it to the protest eventually, but not with their tractors. And of course the government did this because, you know, it would have been quite a sight to see 1,000 tractors lined up there on the field. But anyway, it was a great protest with great atmosphere, and I got some great interviews with some of the farmers here as well. Take a listen. So I'm here with the farmer from Farmers Defence Force here in the Netherlands. Why are you? Introduce yourself and why are you protesting here today?
Yeah, hi, my name is Jos Ubels. I'm Vice President of the Farmers Defence Force, at the same time young farmer. Yeah, why we're protesting in the Netherlands is that actually our government is trying to shut down farms on false grounds. We were here today with a lot of farmers, but also with a lot of civilians. The population of the Netherlands needs to be fed, and we can do this only by import if this is what our government is talking about. And they want to preserve the Netherlands for some emissions agriculture is emitting, but it's a farce because of course we emit, but we also take in nitrogen. So the story is not correct. They should look to our like netto emission, and then we are pretty good businesses because we're working in the circle of life. For example, the industry is only emitting because they burn fossil fuels. So the story is not correct. They're bashing farmers now, and farmers are sick and tired of this. And you can see that our government is making lots of legislations to block farmers, but also the civilians of the Netherlands have lots of trouble with the government because the government is trying to force them in some sort of pattern. They should eat vegan.
The Dutch government is planning on are they planning on seizing the farms or forcing the farmers to sell the land? Basically, is that correct?
Yeah, well, it's actually even worse because you know how governments work. They will never say that they will just take the land because then they know they have a lot of trouble to explain this.
Yes.
No, they say we voluntarily buy your fields for this and this price, for like 100% of the value. But the value is dropping because they designed some areas in which the farms should be sold. So you can imagine if you're a house, you have some houses on your name, and they draw a circle around those houses that those have to be sold to the government and broken down. Those houses will decrease in price, drop in price. And this is what's happening in the farms in the Netherlands now.
And it's more than just price as well, because many of these farms have been in generations,
yes,
generations.
Of course, there's a lot of emotion involved.
Yeah.
We evolved our farms over decades and generations into very high, productive, high quality, animal friendly, environmentally friendly farms. And we are actually known worldwide for having the best farms of the world.
Yeah.
And we are getting rid of them because some propaganda of some politics.
Yeah.
And this is very sad. We can live without politics, is my opinion, but we can't live without farmers. So why?
Yeah, do you think what do you think is the reason they are doing this? Is it part of the World Economic Forum? Do you think they are kind of behind the...
As well, in the beginning of everything, I wouldn't believe this story because I think, how is it possible that one man and one group...
Is it Klaus Schwab that wants you to eat insects? They don't want you to eat meat.
No, but now you're fully wrong because Klaus Schwab telling people to eat insects, but he also say, at the end you will own nothing and still be happy. But Mr. Klaus Schwab will own everything.
Yeah.
So the story, he will never eat the insects. He will force the poor people to eat insects and fake foods and produce hyper produced foods, you know, with a lot of chemicals inside, and they force poverty upon people will bring them to the fact that they have to buy this kind of food because they can't afford the rest. And by breaking down family farms in the Netherlands, food security will be at high stakes.
So it is like communism, where they take from the poor people and only the rich people, the elite, they are the ones with all the power.
Well, actually,
and control.
it's very painful to say, but a free and democratic country, known all over the world, that we have very free laws and very free people that travel everywhere and make agreements all over the world, are now forced in some sort of pattern that we are, communism can be, it sounds like communism. They are
climate communism.
Climate communism. They are green ideologies, and they are just forcing plant agriculture, plant-based economy. Only in this area you can do this and this by the law of the government. And this is very hurtful, and I think it will never be a success. We see this in a lot of communistic countries. They take over agriculture. Stalin in the past said once that the farmers are the evil, we need to get rid of them.
Yeah,
but
and they did that as well.
He did that.
They took it and people starved.
People starve, and so he got power over a lot of people. But at the end of the story, the farmers are the ones needed, and they are always standing up for their right to produce and to feed the country.
Yeah, so you saw that here today with thousands and thousands and thousands of people came here.
Yeah.
But the government actually tried to stop the protests today, I understood. They used military trucks to block the tractors from coming.
Yes, actually, they do this on many levels. Of course, they use force power to show that it's not smart to come here.
Yeah.
They drove in some water jets from Germany because probably our government doesn't have the money anymore to buy them themselves because of their way of practicing. But at the same time, the mayor is also of the same political party, the VVD, that's causing all the trouble in the coalition now. And now, for example, they have the mayor let the trams and the metros today drive in the center of Den Haag. And they never stopped. They were empty, the doors were closed, and they just keep driving, so the people couldn't arrive here.
Interesting.
So this is very undemocratic.
They can to try and stop the protests, it seems.
They do everything in their power.
I think for people around the world, we are seeing in many countries, not just Netherlands, but also many other countries, we're seeing more tyranny, like we're seeing the introduction of digital IDs and so on. And it seems like the farmers in the Netherlands are kind of showing that people are standing up against all of this government tyranny.
Yes.
So they don't want people to see it.
They want to block this because they know they are afraid. This protest was on the 11th of March today, and the 15th of March we have province elections, and the province will choose the first chamber members. So this protest will have a lot of effect on the votes on elections. So they are very scared for their electorate.
Yeah.
They don't want to lose votes, so they try to block everything because they know they're losing.
Yeah. And do you have any final message to everyone? Any final message at all?
Yes.
People should wake up, see what's going on. From Dutch farmers to the world. What's your message?
Every person in the world should have the right to have 3 times a day a beautiful meal. This is often produced by local farmers. You should support them and you should stand behind them because they fight for their countries, they fight for the people.
So today is a big step forward for us in Britain. We're here to show the government that farmers care about our industry and that we care about the future generations of farmers that are not going to be able to afford to farm anymore if we don't stand up and do something about it. Farming in this country is becoming more and more difficult. The government's policies are going to make it even harder to farm in this country. If we don't stand up and do something now, we're going to be just completely beholden to substandard foreign imports that aren't as good as the products that we produce, and that's not fair for the British public and it's not fair for British farmers.
We're here today, there's numerous reasons, but the main reason being, for me anyway, is substandard imports. We're importing a lot of food into the UK, which we're then labelling as British, which it isn't, and this includes meat, veg, the lot. It's wrong, and yeah, British people don't know, any different. They see a label with a British flag on and they think, that's British, that's fine. But you look at the label and it's not British. It's just not British. It's from Spain or, from somewhere else, but we're labelling it as British when it's not. We're importing meat with lower, welfare standards, or it's been injected with hormones. We're telling people in the UK it hasn't got hormones in it because it's British, but it's not British. So there's a lot of problems there surrounding mislabelling food and low quality, low standard imports and importing too much. We've got a lot of meat and veg farmers in the UK who could provide that, but we're buying it from abroad because it's cheaper.
We all get tarred with the same brush, There's a lot of the time I see statistics about farming, but it's not British farming. Our welfare standards are well above what they're often talking about. We should be really proud of that, really shouting from the rooftops, literally, with our megaphones. We should be shouting it. Literally. that's why I thought it was so important. I've come from Lancashire, and I think it's so important to be here because, you know, if we carry on the route that we're on, I can't see a future for me farming. I'm 4.5 months pregnant. I can't see a future for my child farming, you know, and we have to fight, and we have to fight now, because now's the time. Definitely now is the time. And, you know, if we carry on the route we're on, we're just going to see factory farms if we're lucky, you know, and people don't want that. The British public do not want factory farms. They tell me that regularly, you know, and the only way we can do to support that is by standing up and saying, look, keep your small farms, use your British farmers, or you're going to lose your British farmers.
Yeah. Hi, my name's Kerry. I am a co-founder of a group called Vegans Support the Farmers. So we're a group of vegans, and we've been doing a lot of outreach with the farming community over the last few years. That's where we met the organiser of Save British Farming. We were at their tractor rally a couple of years ago where we dressed as veggies on the back of a truck, so it's very colourful. We're doing the same here today because things have got much worse for farmers in terms of subsidies, in terms of imports coming into the country, and just the general pay and conditions. And even though we disagree on one issue, it doesn't mean that we can't actually agree on other issues, and everyone deserves fairness and decent pay. So that's why we're always here to support the farmers. The real issue is that we are facing the biggest challenge that we've ever faced as human beings in terms of the climate crisis, and this country is trying to destroy British farming, and once we lose farmers, that's it, they're gone, and we won't be able to feed ourselves. And that's where we're going to see a lot more than just poverty that we have at the moment. We're going to see people going hungry, and we really do have to wake up to what's actually happening and make a change now and demand that our farmers are supported so that they can face the challenges of the future and we can actually all eat. I don't know about you, but I am really worried about future generations. I think that they're going to inherit a world that's just apocalyptic, and it's not going to look anything like the kind of society we grew up in, and that's just not fair.
We want to be self-sufficient, and I think a lot of people will agree with me in that one. You know, our food should be produced naturally, which it is, and everything, and we have a very high standard in British farming, and yet we don't get any real reward from being a high standard, because they'll import food from outside the EU or inside the EU, whichever, and it's not at the same standard as it is here.
Farming is my life, and it is the lives of many, many people. It's kind of devastating and worrying that we are all now struggling. It was hard enough years ago, but now it's starting to get worse and worse and worse. And yeah, that's kind of half the reason why we're here, because now we can put up with a lot of things, and it just keeps getting more and more, let's just say, and now we're getting to the point where we're fed up, and that's why we're here, really.
I mean this from the bottom of my heart. I feel so proud of what we've achieved thus far, and this is just unprecedented. This has never happened before. We are making history today. This is the beginning of something which is building, and we are not going to stop until we get what we need. Thank you so much, and I look forward to seeing you at the next one.
The heart of Brussels turned into a battleground. On one side, farmers and protesters here to demand change. On the other, riot police. The sky full of acrid smoke from burning tyres.
Tractors barricading highways, manure dumped at government buildings, tires on fire from France to Brussels to Greece to Portugal. Farmers erupting in protests across the continent.
Giant piles of manure in front of government buildings? Weird. Usually they work inside of them. Farmers' protests in Europe are nothing new, and last year saw its fair share in the Netherlands, Germany, and Eastern European countries. But recently, things have gotten out of hand in Europe. All these locations you see here are protests that have happened this year alone, and it's just the beginning of February. Things got especially bad in France, when hundreds of farmers on tractors laid siege around Paris earlier this year. And since this was France, they think their protests were more refined and exceptional than anyone else's, even though they're basically the same, but just used way more butter and cologne. Brussels, the de facto capital of the European Union, also had its fair share of protesters. Farmers from all over Europe, from countries such as Germany, France, Belgium, Italy, and Greece, came together to protest and make demands last week. At least 1,300 tractors clogged streets in Brussels near European Union institutions. I'm surprised tractors are the farm equipment being used for protesting, because grabbing the pitchfork has always been such a go-to classic. Many protesters have clashed with local police and sprayed the streets and buildings with manure. So what exactly were they protesting over? One of the big ticket issues is cheap food imports. Eastern European farmers in particular have issues with cheap Ukrainian food imports after the European Union suspended import duties, quotas, and trade defense measures to help the Ukrainian economy. They're trying to help the Ukrainian economy by hurting their own economies. This is like how Captain Marvel, instead of just, making an interesting, powerful female character, they tried propping her up by making Nick Fury look stupid by comparison. Are MCU writers running the EU? Additionally, there are also concerns about a pending trade agreement with Mercosur, Latin America's largest trading bloc consisting of Argentina, Brazil, Paraguay, and Uruguay. That agreement will lower tariffs on Mercosur agricultural imports. And these kinds of food import agreements worry farmers because they're afraid that cheap food imports will drive them out of business. And this isn't just a matter of greed. Farmers are already struggling to make a living from their profession thanks to lower and lower returns. In 11 EU countries, prices paid to farmers fell by more than 10% from 2022 to 2023. Old MacDonald had a farm, and on this farm he had a lien against his property. E-I-E-I, oh God, what am I going to do? It also doesn't help that natural disasters and disease have put farmers in a serious bind. Even without those issues, things like fuel and fertilizer have been making food production more and more expensive ever since Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Wait, if fertilizer is more expensive, why are they protesting with manure? That'd be like fishermen protesting by chucking caviar. All this is connected to the heart of European farmers' woes: European leaders' obsession with bureaucratic regulations. European regulators are so notorious that European farmers are put at a disadvantage, especially when other countries don't have to follow nearly as many costly and complex regulations, making imports much cheaper.
After 5 years with a lot of legislation, every single month we have a new one from the European Commission, and this should stop. We cannot accept more laws, even when the third countries, they don't respect the same rules that EU farmers. That's a real point.
Il faut que l'État comprenne qu'on n'en peut plus. Les agriculteurs n'en peuvent plus. On est à bout, on est sec en trésorerie, on n'a pas d'argent pour repartir. Voilà, on a trop de normes environnementales. À un moment donné, ça suffit.
I get it. Imagine you're playing football, but you have to follow different rules than the other team. For you, touchdowns are only worth 1 point, there are no field goals, and the other team only has to touch you for a down. Don't think you'll be making the playoffs anytime soon. In response to these frustrations, European leaders have responded with some concessions. France, for example, announced millions of euros in aid, tax breaks, and a promise not to ban pesticides in France that are allowed elsewhere in Europe. And because this is France, I'm sure those pesticides will be extra buttery. Kill the pests with heart disease. The European Commission, meanwhile, delayed plans that would require farmers to leave more of their land fallow, meaning not planting anything in it for a season. Instead, it allows farmers to use some land that had been forced to lie fallow to grow certain crops, such as lentils and peas. European leaders also announced plans to shield farmers from cheap Ukrainian imports, driving prices down. They also said they wouldn't approve a trade deal with Mercosur unless imports meet the same regulatory standards that EU farmers face. Now, a lot of this sounds like kicking the can down the road, because it is. Things wouldn't have gotten nearly as bad as they are now if it weren't for European leaders letting their obsession with the supreme boogeyman, climate change, screw over the people who feed them. European farmers are mad, and for good reason. Many feel like the current system in Europe makes a mockery of both farmers and consumers. Why would they feel that way? Simple. European leaders have made farmers the scapegoats for climate change through their green policies. Yes, farmers. I don't know if I've ever seen a more literal example of biting the hand that feeds. European leaders like European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen have long championed reaching net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050 through an ambitious European Green Deal. The deal aims to introduce measures including a tax on carbon, pesticide bans, nitrogen emission curbs, and restrictions on water and land usage. It's pretty obvious that these policies focus a lot of attention on farmers and force them to make sacrifices in the name of climate action. But that's okay. I mean, it's not like farmers need water and land to grow produce. Everyone knows vegetables just magically appear in supermarkets all by themselves. The same way my laundry does itself every time I visit my mom. Climate activists like Greenpeace have long advocated for governments to gut farming after claiming that farms are far worse for the climate than cars. So instead of farming, we could just start eating cars now. If you thought corn was bad for your digestion, wait until you try a Kia. So European politicians have basically taken these kinds of warnings as go-aheads for making life hell for farmers. One of the ways they've been doing that is by asking farmers to reduce livestock, relocate, or shut down. The Netherlands, a major beef exporter, was recently really into this when it planned to buy and close thousands of farms to meet climate goals, all with the EU's approval. This really didn't sit well with Dutch farmers because, surprise, surprise, these kinds of policies make life for farmers more difficult. It's almost as if European leaders hate farmers for doing their job, feeding people. Look, I've had some mediocre hamburgers in my life, but I've never thought, I must destroy this farmer and their entire bloodline's livelihood for generations to come. Just leave a Yelp review, man. Unsurprisingly, Europe has also been quick to add stricter rules that increase obligations on farms to reduce industrial emissions. And people are getting upset with the rules. One Italian protester told the Daily Mail, "Europe imposes rules on us that make no sense. We can no longer make a living. We want to make more money and have our products valued for what they are." European elites claim that they're making food supply chains resilient by making them sustainable through environmentally friendly frameworks like the European Green Deal's farm-to-fork strategy. But according to the US Department of Agriculture, Europe's policies might lead to reduced productivity, higher food prices, and further global food insecurity if implemented. Not exactly something I'd consider sustainable. It's pretty insane to see European leaders attacking their own food chains. This goes against everything I learned playing real-time strategies, and is straight up World Economic Forum levels of crazy, which European leaders aren't strangers of. Even from an environmentally conscious point of view, it's really hard to see if this makes sense. Think about it. They're making their measure of success depend on local greenhouse emissions. But if they're pushing for more global products from places with many less environmental regulations, like meat from Latin America, how exactly is that going to help the supposed global climate crisis? What good is having low emissions locally if you're creating more elsewhere? Although I guess it does technically help reduce carbon footprints if millions end up starving to death. But by that logic, you could say Pol Pot was one of the greatest environmentalists in history. It's funny to see how a lot of left-leaning elites, especially the mainstream media, are quick to connect legitimate farmer protests to the quote-unquote far right, and how far-right politicians and parties are going to capitalize on farmers' grievances. Well, I guess needing to, eat is a pretty old-fashioned conservative idea. The mainstream media, whether it's American or European, loves scaring people with the far-right label.
Leaders will have to work on a more convincing set of measures to avoid growing support for the far right ahead of the European parliamentary elections in June.
People these days keep saying far right so many times, I don't even know what it means anymore. But who cares about definitions? Labeling people you don't like as far right is the go-to strategy for politicians and the mainstream media to demonize people. So why are so many people quick to connect the far right to farmer protests? Perhaps it's because the European parliamentary election is coming up later this year, and elites are afraid of losing seats to people who don't think like them. Or it could be how progressives try to frame the backlash against Europe's green initiatives to democratic backsliding, which is when a country moves from democracy towards authoritarianism. But if you ask me, we should be more concerned about the opposite, climate activism leading to democratic backsliding. If wanting to change what people eat isn't evidence enough, the fact that you have people questioning if democracy and climate mitigation are incompatible should definitely frighten you. After all, according to this horrifying article, democracy works by compromise, but climate change is precisely the type of problem that seems not to allow for it, which is scary, because all you have to do is cite climate change to shut down discussion.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is Jeroen van Manen. I'm a dairy farmer from Revolt, a city in the middle of the Netherlands. Someone asked me if I could send a message what's going on in Holland, what's all about these farmer protests and why are Dutch farmers angry. Well, the farmer protests are already here since 2.5 years. The 1st of October 2019 was the first time Dutch farmers had a very big protest. We all went to The Hague. And actually there was more like some protest about the wind which was blowing already probably for 30 years, that somewhere there's a problem in the environment, there's a problem with pollution. Agriculture sector gets pointed at as main cause of all problems. After that, after the biggest protest, nitrogen problems came up, and nitrogen problems aren't new. 30 years ago already, nature people start talking about nitrogen pollution, which would make the rain sour, and all the sour rain would cause lots of damage to the nature parks, to forests. And when you would hear these voices, all the nature would be gone in a few years. Well, 30 years later, nature's still there. Most of it is in excellent condition.
Let's thank our governments for the fear-mongering, unnecessary fear-mongering.
Well, 2.5 years, people start talking about nitrogen emission, ammonia from agriculture sector. There's also nitrogen pollution because of the traffic, because of the industry, nitrogen oxides.
Those industries make a lot of money and they go to certain hands, so I don't think they're going to be closing those down anytime soon.
But we don't talk about it a lot. When the nitrogen problem is called in Holland, it's focusing most of the times on agriculture sector only.
The sector that feeds people around the world.
Well, when the thing started, and actually what I wanted to do is reducing the nitrogen emission, and especially the nitrogen deposition on nature parks. Well, it started, agriculture sector came together, all parties, like the dairy industry, pork industry, chicken industry, you could ever call whatever industries, came together, made a big plan. There was a lot of solutions in it, and we tried to solve the problem.
That's good. That's really good. They show initiative. They want to improve things, even though the Dutch, like I said, tiny country, big production, and probably minimal waste and effect on the environment as well compared to other countries. I bet you they must be one of the cleanest agricultural sectors in the world.
Our government, in the meanwhile, went on with making other plans, which resulted in the latest new plan a few weeks ago, and it's terrible. It's idiot, and it's of no use. What they did is they divided Holland in different regions. Some regions have to lower their emissions by 12%. Some regions have to lower their emissions by 46, 75, or 95%. In the meanwhile, our juridical system is...
Hang on, can I just comment on what a beautiful cow and what a beautiful farm this seems to be? How well this cattle seems to be taken care of?
On this moment that no innovations in agriculture sector are allowed to use. So there are different techniques for lowering your emission, but when you are asked for a court and a judge will look into your innovations, they will say you can't use it. So the only reason, the only thing to lower your emissions right now is just cutting your herd back. And actually you're probably coming at the main cause of it all. Nitrogen is more like, we call it stick to beat the dog. It's just to camouflage the real cause. Some left-wing parties in Holland and probably all over the world, it's the same movement. They want to get rid of animal industries. They want to have a transition to more plant-based food, transition to vegetarians. We have all the stuff together. In Holland we also have a party like that, and they asked for 50% reduction of our national herd. That's probably on this moment the main cause of it all. We're not talking about nitrogen. No, they just want to reduce the national herd.
50% reduction of herds? That's huge. And by the way, what about letting everybody decide what they want to eat instead of forcing a vegetarian diet on us all by reducing the dairy and meat supply to an extent that makes it so expensive that we won't even be able to afford to buy it anymore.
Well, every farmer all around the world and also every citizen knows that cutting back the herd isn't the cause of any problems. You know, we are producing food. 2/3 of agricultural land on the planet can only be grown by grass, and you need cows like this for making grass into meat or into milk or whatever you want. Whatever problem with emissions, with pollution on the world you are asking about, whether it's not chemical, but farming is probably a part of the problem, but most of it all, it's part of the solution. Well, Dutch farmers now are getting angry every day more.
I don't blame them.
Government is not listening, and what we are fearing for is we have to leave our land, and that's also a deeper agenda behind it. In Holland, they just want to have farmers' land. 62% of the area in Holland is farmed by farmers, and what they want to do is they want to have the land cheap, so they're making it nature first, and when they have the land in their hands, they can build houses on it. Houses we don't need by Dutch citizens, because average Dutch couple is getting 1.8, 1.9 kids. So what's the problem of the demand for houses? That we get 100,000 refugees in this country every year. That's why they have to build houses. Well, that's a shortcut of our problems right now.
So they're trying to drive the farmers into bankruptcy so they can buy their land cheap and build houses on the beautiful soil that is feeding so many people. I bet you if you sneeze on one of those agricultural fields in the Netherlands, a booger tree would sprout a couple of days later. And they're thinking about building houses there? Are you kidding me? What a waste of precious soil. It's criminal. It's careless. It's stupid. It's evil. Houses don't fill our tummies.
Farmers are getting angry. They're not listened by the government. Every solution we came on with, they don't take it. And what we see right now, when we have to reduce our national herd, when we have to reduce our herds by ourselves, farms will break down. On this moment, when the plan of the government is coming through, probably 30, 40, 50% of the farmers have to fear for the future. That's why we're on the street. That's why we're protesting. That's why the protests are going harder. And actually, quite happily, all around the world, people start looking at Holland, what's happening there. Well, what the warning from the Dutch farmers is that every citizen from Holland especially, but also in Europe, probably around the globe, have to look at what do we want to have to eat in a few years' time.
I want to be able to eat whatever I want to eat, whatever is best for me and my body, and I hope you can too.
Dutch agriculture is world champion on every class, whether we talk about nitrogen, whether we talk about other pollutions. Dutch farming is best in all chapters, so it's no solution to get rid of Dutch farmers. The production which is going away up here needs to come back in another different area from the world. Well, we need transport for that. It gives CO2 emissions, and also the standards of production up there aren't as high as in Dutch agriculture.
Exactly. Why would you destroy something so valuable, something that they have been working on for so many years? So much so that they've achieved a level of efficiency that is unmatched anywhere else in the world. It's so destructive and so disrespectful.
So that's why we're fighting on the street. We want to stay on our land.
I want you to stay on your land too.
When we are part of a problem, we want to solve it. We can do it. We always did it. Nitrogen pollution, nitrogen emissions turned back 68% by agriculture sector in Holland in the last 30 years.
That's something to be proud of.
So we prove we can do a lot of things, but we will keep on farming. We will fight for our farms. That's why we have the actions. We have the protest in the country. We're asking a lot of attention for our problems. This is in Holland we call it a farmer's handkerchief, and it's made the symbol of the battle of the farmers right now. And actually, it feels good that foreign people asking for what's happening in Holland, and we're warning you all over Europe. This problem, which is here in Holland, can be your problem in the next years.
Oh, it will be very quickly. This is ridiculous. It's one of those things where if we don't do something now and we let things develop in this way, it will be too late when we realize the effect this will have on us all. There's enough inflation and food insecurity as it is. Let's not add to the problem with this backwards approach.
So we're asking for support from farmers and also citizens in Europe, all around the world. This problem could be your problem. When citizens want to have food on the plate in the next 10 years, then we have to stand up for our farmers. Dutch farmers are standing up. We are supporting all farmers around the world. Keep on doing what we do, and we have to start fighting for our farms, for our future, for our families, and for food on the table. Thanks very much.
That message was so scary to me, and I really hope that people continue to stand up and support these farmers, because this is insane. It affects us all. If this continues, the food supply in our supermarkets is going to go down and the price tags are going to go up. It's going to make putting food on our tables for our families very difficult. So I hope people stand up for the Dutch farmers and for all the farmers in the world, and I hope we all start supporting our local farmers in every possible way we can, because we need them. The role they play in the world it's invaluable.
I'm seeing that the farmers' protests are escalating. Lately in France, they've really have been raging strong there, which I expect the French to always, they really, the French and the Irish, I feel like the two of you guys protest. And when you do, it's like real protesting, it's not for the faint of heart. But I watched the French protesters building a wall, like trying to blockade in their politicians. They're just going crazy. Can you explain to us, we've seen the farmers' protest spread throughout all of Europe now. What is and this, we saw Netherlands, the farmers there were protesting a couple of years ago, so now it's ramped up. Can you explain kind of the backstory of how these protests got going? Why are they protesting?
Yeah, sure, Kim. Well, in a nutshell, they're protesting because they're finally getting it, if you will. So I think there's a lot of awakening around the world since COVID, especially, and the climate stuff that's going on, and the trans and all that stuff. It's all connected to Agenda 2030, the UN goals, WEF, etc. So we know that. But the farmers are beginning to realize, like a lot of people, okay, this is an orchestrated campaign to kind of almost eliminate us, and to replace local farming, healthy foods locally, in local communities, to replace that with a kind of a massive pipeline of ultra-processed food from the big corporations. And, you will eat the bugs and all that nonsense. So they actually realize now that it's not just the usual to and fro with governments, where the governments put in extra taxes and diesel taxes, etc., and they fight back a little, and then they get a bit of a kind of the backing off by the government. I think they know now, because they're not accepting any of these little ploys to give them a break for 12 months. The farmers actually realize this is an end game of sorts, and that now is the time to dig in and stand, or there won't be anything to stand for. So yeah, Netherlands nitrogen was the excuse used. Yeah. They used the nitrogen, climate, ecosystem stuff. If you look at the actual data for the Netherlands, they leveled off on their nitrogen in organic kind of rivers, etc., back in, I think, 2015, and it's slowly fallen, and everything is kind of under control. But the government, of course, is using the nitrogen as an excuse to implement agendas and goals. Climate is always just an excuse, if people keep that in mind. And in France, they've used other levies and taxes. And in Ireland, they're trying to suggest, leaked memos from the department suggested they'd like to cull 200,000 cows. And now it wasn't an announcement or a stipulation. The fact checkers blowed on about that it was not actually an announcement, but it's irrelevant. It was all written down in department documents. That's what they want. So all of this climate nonsense is basically to disenfranchise farmers and all of us, but particularly farmers. The goal is quite simple. It's to steadily remove and erode local subsistence, local supply of food, and replace it with globalized international supplies of food. And in the same way, they don't want really a lot of local power generation from local resources. They've been eliminating all those in Ireland. They want the power to be kind of a weapon that you're dependent on the power grid. Electric cars are the same. The actual equation for the benefits of electric cars, if you take in the environmental impact of all the batteries and all the minerals, is absurd, right?
Yeah.
This has been said by senior members of even governments in various places. So the idea is to get people dependent on electrical supply, whereas locally provided or stored diesel gives people independence. So everything is moving towards remorselessly crushing countries' sovereignty and their nationalist ideals and their local self-sufficiency, and move towards the classic 15-minute city. You'll own nothing and be happy, and we'll provide your food and your power until you say something negative against the government.
Right.
And then we'll have to look again.
Yeah, I mean, they have to figure out ways to control the people, and the ways to control is certainly our livelihoods, certainly our ability to survive, right? And that's our money, debanking people, to cutting off food supply, cutting off power, cutting off communication. And so gaining control over these things, you know, it would be the way to do it. But the thing that is really interesting about Europe in particular, and the current farming issue and the current issue around food, is a couple of things. First of all, I've lived in Europe a couple of times, in France and in Italy, and the food there is very different than here in the United States. Here in the US, I think we get a lot of big corporate farming. We get all the GMOs in the food. We get all the modified stuff. And our food lasts a really long time. I could go to the grocery store here in the United States once every 2 weeks, and the food just doesn't ever spoil. In Europe, when I was there, I had to go grocery shopping practically every day. The food spoils very quickly because it's not processed with and not enhanced with all of these various things that they do to our food here in the United States. It's probably also why Americans are bigger and fatter. I think the hormones and the stuff that they stick in our food versus Europeans. And I say that because my family's from Vietnam. My cousins that were born here in the United States and raised here with both Vietnamese parents. I'm half white, but they're like, my cousins are big, and I look at them and I'm like, there's no way genetically they're supposed to be this tall and big when they have these two tiny little Vietnamese parents, right? So I think the food is hormone laden and all kinds of stuff here in the United States. I didn't really get that sense over in Europe. So it's interesting. First of all, I mean, I'm just curious, are the people in throughout Europe, in the UK, and Ireland, are people concerned that moving in this direction, it's not, so just taking the farmers and their issues out of it just for a second, and their issues with not making, you know, they're barely holding on financially, and then these new policies are crushing them and all this. So taking that aside, are the people concerned that going to these big farming practices, corporate farming, global farming, that is going to create food like the United States and start feeding it to you? I mean, if I were European or anywhere on that continent, I would be like, no way, I do not want America. I mean, it tastes like, when I came back, every time I'd come back after living periods of time in Europe and I'd come back to the United States, the food tastes like plastic here. Yeah. I mean, it just isn't good. So are people concerned about that just from a basic person to person level?
Yeah, I think the problem, Kim, is that the majority, sadly, and we saw it through COVID, they don't really think much. So critical thinking and analytics and analytical thinking in the last 40, 50 years, especially since the end of World War II, a few generations have passed and people have become kind of dumb. Now, of course, it takes 20,000 years in an evolutionary cycle to really change a species at all. So it's not like any of this obesity or this lack of critical thinking is in any way genetic. It's absolutely not. It's societal and cultural. So people really don't think clearly. I'm in a low carb community, keto carnivore, if you will, hundreds of thousands of people worldwide. And we are highly focused on what you just said. But most normal people just assume the food will continue to be supplied. The supermarkets will still have food. They don't seem to connect the war on the farmers with actually a lower amount of high quality food, amazing though that is. And essentially, I say with food, the simplest possible thing I can say after 10 years and thousands of published papers analyzed, and the book we released in 2017, the simplest thing you can say is if you just eat meat, fish, and eggs and kind of above ground vegetables that are not starchy, you know, like potatoes and all that kind of thing are very starchy, full of sugar. But if you just eat meat, fish, and eggs and vegetables, tomorrow morning, if that's all people ate, most of pharma would collapse within a few years, the pharma companies, because they're built on statins and antihypertensives, you know, anti-blood pressure drugs. That would just fall off the map if people could only eat meat, fish, and eggs. And then you can say, well, what's the real problem? The real problem is what you mentioned. It's ultra-processed foods. They're long shelf life. They're internationalized. They've got amazing supply chains that make big food business make a ton of money. And they're junk. And British Medical Journal a few years ago looked and were shocked to see that under the category of ultra-processed foods, which we know cause the modern chronic disease, diabetes type 2, obesity, Alzheimer's, which is now called diabetes type 3, right? Because there's diabetes off the neurological circuits.
Wow.
The BMJ found that over 60% of all calories consumed in the UK are from ultra-processed foods. And Ireland's not much better, and America's worse. And they contain what I call the devil's triad. So we keep it really simple for people. What is the root of the modern chronic disease epidemics? It's sugar, refined carbs, refined grains, and vegetable oils, the heart-healthy vegetable oils, which are the opposite. Those three components, I call the devil's triad, they make up most of the calories in ultra-processed food. And that's what makes the food bad, is the devil's triad. If you eliminate that triad, and you have to, of course, eliminate most of what's in the supermarket because it's all ultra-processed, you're left with meat, fish, and eggs and vegetables and what we ate, say, 5,000 to 10,000 years ago. And that's how simple it is. Now, I know we mentioned psychologically there's an addictive nature to this food, so it's not as simple as just flicking a switch, because the temptation to eat the ultra-processed stuff is enormous. And I know we wrote a chapter on that in our book, just the psychology. It's tricky.
Well, it's very addicting. Carbs are very addicting. Sugars are very addicting. Oils are very addicting, right? All of it is delicious and addicting. That's kind of the point of it. So I'm interested though that, so point one with the farmers' protest, kind of circling back to this, the first thing is I'm curious why people in Europe aren't looking at the United States and saying, I don't want that. I don't want that kind of food. So we need to stick to, I read a stat that I think in Europe, the family farms are still like 95% of the farms over there. It's still just a massive, massive number, which is why I feel like Europe is being targeted. The farmers are being targeted there. Here in the United States, we have a lot more corporate farming. So, and we're already really reliant on international food and even just other countries owning our farmlands. But in Europe, I think it's different. And so we're not seeing the uprising against on farmers here because they've already been attacked. They've already been obliterated. They're already barely hanging on here in the United States. And in Europe, there's a lot more of those family farms. And it seems that they're now really massively under attack and trying to eliminate them by making it incredibly difficult to make a living as a farmer, to where then farmers just stop farming. I know I come from a farming family. My family owned farms forever. It was my father sold the farm, but my grandfather, his father, ultimately worked on the farm for a while and then just decided, I can't farm anymore. This is just, it's too difficult. There's no real profit in it. And he became a trucker rather than a farmer, and kept the family farm going, but rented out the farm, and then my dad ultimately sold it. But that's what happens in families now. Families are stopping the farming. It's no longer a business that's worth keeping in the family, that is going to be beneficial for the family. It's a stress and it's a headache and it's hard more than anything. And that is, there's no profit in it. And my family would tell me stories of how my grandparents would struggle as they were farming, and my great grandparents would struggle, and they came from Denmark and they started the farm here. So in Europe, it just seems like this is happening. I would think that the people are really upset about that. Secondly, what I find really interesting, but like you said, maybe they're just not thinking that way. They're not realizing they're going to end up with just a bunch of junk food if they go down this path, which they should be thinking ahead about. The other thing I find interesting about this, though, is why would the European leadership want to be reliant on global food production when they have done everything they possibly can to cut off anything from Russia, for example? Like, you go to war with a country and suddenly, or you're backing a certain country in a war, and suddenly you cut off the grain, you cut off like the fuel, or the gas lines, and cut off everything. I would think that the war, if anything, would have made people, and the pandemic, both of those combined, would make people realize we have to be reliant on ourselves. Isn't this odd that they're now wanting to shift to this global, after being like, oh, and then we have to cut everything off and all the rates of energy goes way up. And I mean, it just seems insane.
It does seem insane, and that's what makes it hard for a lot of average people. They know something's seriously wrong, as you describe, but they can't quite put their finger on it. And people have been programmed for decades to think of anything with high-level power structures orchestrating the stuff. People have been programmed to think of that as a conspiracy theory. And that they've done a great job on that. So traditionally, like 50, 60 years ago, I often make this point, people were concerned and feared centralized power up top orchestrating their lives. That was people's natural distrusting kind of feeling. But now they've managed to make it that someone who actually distrusts the top level, you call them a conspiracy theorist. So people distrust the person who distrusts the top level,
right,
which is complete inversion. It's insane, but that's what they have. And I interviewed Professor Richard Werner, who about CBDCs, which is a similar problem coming.
He's great. Yeah.
Great guy.
Real smart.
But oh, he's great. But he told me a couple of things, and one of them is relevant to what you asked, very much so. So he told me something I wasn't fully aware of. He said, you know, the European system for the last 20, 30 years, and now it's heading straight to authoritarian insanity, as you described. It's got like the European kind of Commission, which is unelected, and they set all the rules and strategies. And they have a European Parliament, which theoretically debates the laws, but they don't make the laws, and it's a talk shop. Now, he said, what is that an exact mirror of? And it's the Soviet system.
Yeah.
So Soviet Russia had the Politburo, the top party guys, and they decided what was going to happen. And there was a Soviet parliament that was a talk shop that allowed people to wrangle, but it had no power. So he said one or two historians have actually called this out in papers, that the EU has literally leveraged the Soviet centralized system, almost exactly. And that's the answer to the question. It's quite simple. The EU Commission at the top is now fully invested with the UN, the WEF, and all the other groups like Club of Rome and Trilateral Commission, yada, 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 all the way back to the US State Department, which pulls a lot of strings. And they are doing what the top strata believe is best for the planet, and for them, of course, but for the planet. So ordinary people are just stupid in their mind. Ordinary politicians locally and nationally are just idiots who are only looking at the next election cycle. So they at the top truly believe the world needs to be managed. And that means slowing down the use of resources, guarding all the resources for the future, and of course, bringing in an ant farm, as my daughter called it. Bring in a totalitarian system where people feel that they're kind of free and Western. You keep them under that illusion. But the reality is, everywhere you turn, it's a centralized economy run from the top. Hence, we see all this madness. So it makes no sense, of course, as you described, in these troubled times, to take away local sovereign sources of energy and food. It's catastrophic.
Right.
But it does fit the plan and the strategy of Agenda 2030, which is being rolled out. It fits perfectly.
Oh. And that'll do it. Mm-hmm. Alright then. Good night.